All right, in this unit we're going to turn to the first of our 7 isms for the course, idealism. The reason we're doing idealism first is that it's the most ancient of the philosophical systems, historically speaking. Humans were religious for a long time before philosophy was developed, and I think it's fair to say that the first systems of philosophies were systematizations of religious thinking, but rather than accepting the stories of the religion on faith or as a matter of tradition, the first philosophers in the idealist tradition were more concerned with making arguments for and systematizing those stories. Now, idealism as a system goes back to the Greeks. The first great idealist philosopher is Plato, and there's a long line of idealist thinking spawned by Plato, many variations obviously on idealist thinking. But what they all have in common is an affinity for a religious way of thinking about the world. Whether they're explicitly religious or not, and however many ways in which they disagree with religion, most idealist thinkers will hold that the essentially religious way of thinking about the universe and our place in it is the right way to think about it. Now, idealism is, in this context, a metaphysical label. We sometimes talk about people being idealist ethically or politically, having a set of values that they are committed to. In this case, what we mean is that the stuff of the world is essentially the stuff of ideas and the kinds of beings that have ideas. That is to say, we're giving mind priority over matter, or the spiritual world, if we think of the world as populated by a grand spirit or several spirits who have minds. That is what we are giving priority in our metaphysical system, hence the label idealism. If we think, for example, of most traditional religions, particularly the Western religions, where we have a personalized divinity, God is conceived of as a giant mind or a great mind or an all-encompassing mind. And his mind has ideas, it has thoughts, it has plans, it has designs. And so we understand the world in terms of God's idea, right, for the world pre-existing it, and the universe and all of creation is an expression of that idea, hence idealism. Now, I want first to put idealism's major theses, the generic ones up in terms of the philosophical categories of metaphysics, human nature, epistemology, and ethics, and where necessary indicating major subspecies or major divides within the idealist tradition. But I want, for the most part, to stay as generic as possible in this long and complicated tradition. Metaphysically, I think the best way to say idealism's core theses is to capture it as a thoroughgoing dualism, that the best way to understand, the truest way to understand the universe and everything that exists is in terms of a divide between a lower realm, what we will call the natural realm. So there is the realm of nature, and then above, beyond, superior to, we have the realm of supernature. And in this dualism, there's a fairly systematic opposition between the two realms in terms of their various features. So we can say, for example, that the supernatural world is a spiritual world, right? Completely non-physical. The natural world, by contrast, is non-spiritual. It is, say, purely material or purely physical. The supernatural world is a realm of perfection, whereas by contrast, the natural world is imperfect, or it's subject to various sorts of corruptions. The supernatural world is an eternal world. It's not subject to time considerations, say, or change. Why would it if it's already perfect? And so we can say, in some sense, those temporal change concepts don't apply to it. Whatever is true of it is true for all time. By contrast, the world of nature is a world of change. It may be a world of process. So we can say up here, for example, that this is a world of absolutes. whereas down here we have things that are in process. They are the way they are for a certain amount of time, but even in that time, they're on the way to being whatever it is that they are next. Everything in the natural world is particular. By contrast, things in the supernatural world are more general. Down here we have a realm of, say, concretes in all of their traits. Up here, the perfect world is much more abstract and so on. So we have a fairly systematic then opposition between all of the features of the natural world, all of the features of the supernatural world. The supernatural world has a value component typically attached to it. It's the higher world, it's the better world. So we can add that here. This world is, by contrast, the lower world. And in many cases, there is a tension or an opposition between how things work in the natural world and where the natural world tends to go of its own right, by contrast, where the supernatural world goes and where it wants to go of its own right. Okay. That's a dualism on a cosmic scale, metaphysically speaking. I want next to talk about human nature from an idealist perspective. And as with most philosophies, the human being is seen as a microcosm of the macrocosm, the broader world here. And so what we will find in the case of a human being is a distinction within our nature. We ourselves are dualists. And so from our earlier discussion of dualism, almost all idealists are fairly thoroughgoing dualists in their view of human nature. So what we'll have up here is we'll have our soul, and then down below we'll have our body, or we might think of ourselves as having a spirit. Our body, by contrast, is purely physical. Up here we will have our mind, including in many cases, say, our capacity for reason, that being the thing that distinguishes us from the other animal species that are merely physical bodies, on various sorts. And down below here we will have our senses, which we do share with the other animals, but our senses are embodied physical traits and so forth. Now again, just as there is a difference of destiny, approach, goals, and so forth, metaphysically at the higher level, in looking at human nature, most, but again not all, but most advocates of idealism will hold that there is a conflict between these two aspects of our human nature. Naturally, our bodies have certain desires, certain drives for food, sex, drink, materialistic sorts of things. By contrast, our souls and spirits have at least the capacity with them for a higher destiny. If properly trained or if properly constituted, they're not interested in bodily things. Instead, their ultimate destiny and an ultimate yearning is to reunite with and come to know and commune with the higher world as well. So at any given point, the human being is torn by a conflict. Our body always has its desires and its appetites, and at the same time our soul has its desires and its appetites, but you can't serve two masters at any given time, and so one has a conflict. Am I going to satisfy a bodily urge, or am I going to satisfy a spiritual urge in this particular case? There's almost always a value judgment association with here. We can add that the soul is, of course, the higher element within us. It's that which we share in kinship with the higher realm metaphysically, and our body is the lower part of ourselves as well. And when we turn to the ethics of idealism, there are strong implications important here.